welcome to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers. You are here in season 5 of Wrestling at Random, where the theme is more wrestling than ever. That can take the form of pay-per-views, specials, weekly TV shows from any and every territory and promotion. Many you've heard of, a lot that maybe you haven't heard from. 19,000 entries of wrestling dropped into the randomizer, some 50 or 60,000 hours of professional wrestling. And this week, the randomizer took us to like somewhere near a sweet spot, but not exactly a sweet spot. That would be Worldwide Wrestling Mid-Atlantic era from the summer of 1983. I always enjoy these shows because they're adjacent to the things I grew up on, but I didn't actually grow up on Mid-Atlantic itself.
No, when I hear NWA Worldwide, I immediately think of the syndicated shows of 1987, 88, 89 eras where it was Jim Crockett Promotions.
Exactly.
It wasn't exclusively the Mid-Atlantic territory. This is the predecessor to that, like you mentioned. This is the original Worldwide Wrestling, and it's the Mid-Atlantic. It's the companion to the Mid-Atlantic TV show that we've reviewed here many times, both in our bonus feed over at our Patreon, patreon.com/wrestling at random, and here in the free feed as well. We've reviewed plenty of Mid-Atlantic shows. This is the sister show to that, NWA Worldwide. And this one comes to us from August 20th, 1983. So we're going way back. We're in the Mid-Atlantic territory of the National Wrestling Alliance. It's still Jim Crockett Promotions here in Mid-Atlantic, but they haven't gone nationwide yet.
Yes, exactly. It is a true territory at this point. We get a classic 80s wrestling open here for Worldwide, and we join in progress. It's Bugsy McGraw going at it with somebody.
Bugsy McGraw, Tim Lintz, I think.
Tim Lintz, Tom Lynch, Lindsay Dorado. I'm not sure.
Tom Lintz, yeah. So
this was it's a very lo-fi video from the deepest, darkest reaches of the web. So some of the details from a visual standpoint and an audio standpoint are a bit lost. Tom Lynch, Tim Lintz, whatever he is, he looks like a mini Ivan Koloff, whereas Bugsy McGraw, in a weird way with his movements here, he kind of reminds me of Thunderbolt Patterson. Like, he just moves around in a really odd way.
Bugsy McGraw is right up there with Jimmy Valiant in guys that I don't get. I don't get it because I wasn't there at that. You know, we're looking at it through different eyes, and I'm trying to put myself in 1983. I'm trying to put myself in the Carolinas when I'm watching this. But man, no, I don't know about Bugsy McGraw. I don't know what it was a real time and place, I guess.
For sure. And it's not like we were only, each of us as kids independently were like only into the great technical wrestlers. Like, some of my favorite wrestlers growing up were guys like Junkyard Dog or Iceman King Parsons or any of those guys. So like, I had an affinity for the not great wrestlers that had incredible charisma, but then there were guys like Bugsy McGraw or Jimmy Valiant that just did not make sense to me and still don't. The only thing that makes less sense to me than Bugsy McGraw, the character, is the fact that he wins this match with a running babyface splash. Not only does Lynch not get his knees up, he gets pinned by this maneuver.
I immediately said, "Holy cow! A babyface splash for the win!" This was incredible. Can't remember the last time I saw that.
No.
We go to our next match. Ric Flair, the Nature Boy. Ric Flair is teaming with Cowboy Bob Orton Jr. as baby faces.
Talk about things I was not aware of, have no recollection of. The idea in Mid-Atlantic in 1983 that Bob Orton and Ric Flair were a babyface tag team with matching green tights is the strangest, most out of left field thing I've seen in a long time.
Tremendous that they're a tag team that are going to be matching. They're wearing matching gear. Love it. Anytime a team actually looks like a team. And here's two guys teaming up to take on Joe Howard and Golden Boy Gray.
I got Bill Howard and Golden Boy Gray, but I don't think it particularly matters. Yes, they are. They're not quite continental jobbers, but it's clear here. Unlike with some of the other guys you'll see in Mid-Atlantic, it's pretty clear here who the stars are and who aren't the stars. The most important thing about this match, other than just the weirdness of Flair and Orton as a babyface tag team, is that David Crockett tells us right away that Harley Race has put a bounty out on Ric Flair. So we are firmly in the Harley Race with a bounty on Ric Flair heading towards Starrcade 83 story.
Yeah, so we're at the end of August, so we're a couple months away from November and the Starrcade 83 here.
Did we do Starrcade 83 really early on, or am I imagining things?
We've seen matches from there, but not the show.
Yeah, I know we did 86 on the whole, but I thought we had maybe,
Correct.
We must have just seen matches or we saw clips on another TV show.
Yeah, we have not reviewed the entire thing, but if you want us to, you could actually, we have a tier over at our Patreon, patreon.com/wrestlingatRandom, where you can be the randomizer, and we just don't get a randomly chosen show. You can choose a match or curated list or a show for us to watch. So that is the place to do that. If you haven't heard our bonus content, it's also available on Apple Podcasts. If that's your podcatcher of choice, you can hit the subscribe button there and unlock over 140 plus bonus episodes right now in your bonus feed.
Yeah, it's like the equivalent of, as we approach 150, we're at between, I guess, 4 and 5 seasons worth of episodes that you've never heard before, brand new to you, exclusive episodes in the bonus feed. So yes, like Jeremy said, check that out at patreon.com/wrestlingatRandom, or you can get it in the Apple Podcast feed.
Flair is a babyface, beloved. These people are going bonkers for Ric Flair and everything he does. Flair and Orton are trading elbows to the head of Howard. Gray and Howard double team Orton in the corner. Flair's seen enough. He comes into the ring, but the referee puts him out, allowing more double teaming.
They're getting a lot of offense for being Gray and Howard against Ric Flair and Bob Orton. They're getting a ton of offense.
Gray takes Orton down and gets a 0 count.
Remember when I said it earlier that you can tell who the stars and the non-stars are? You can tell right here.
Orton picks Gray up. He just picks the man up and walks over to his corner to tag in Ric Flair. So they weren't really doing a great job of cutting him off here when Orton could just physically pick you up and walk over there.
I actually really enjoyed that, though, that this was a somewhat pathetic heel tag team trying to do the things that successful heel tag teams do, but they just could not succeed and got cut off almost immediately. Like, I can't recall seeing that particular story play out in a tag team match. It was great.
So Flair's in. He beats up both men until he misses an elbow drop. And Howard punches Flair in the corner. Backdrops Ric Flair. Gray and Howard are double teaming Ric Flair now in the corner. A small package gets a 1 count on Flair. A chop, and Flair immediately tags in Orton. Drop kicks all around by babyface Bob Orton, which is so weird.
It's so weird. House of Fire Bob Orton hitting big, tall guy, beautiful drop kicks, like Dustin Rhodes style drop kicks. Looked great. The one thing you didn't mention, the spot of this match, Flair and Orton improvising, inventing a double team version of an atomic drop, not the double atomic drop where they're each picking the guy up and dropping him down one cheek over each knee, so to speak. Bob Orton has, I believe it was Howard, in a bear hug. Ric Flair stands behind Howard, kneels down on one knee, and Bob Orton brings him down hard on the knee in an atomic drop style position. This needs to come back.
We get a bulldog by Orton, but on the outside, someone is out there attacking Ric Flair. We get a running power slam by Orton, and he gets the pin. Jacques Goulet tried to attack Flair to collect the $25,000 bounty that Harley Race has on the head of Ric Flair, but the bounty collection attempt was thwarted by Ric Flair and Bob Orton.
This was so good because you had David Crockett earlier telling us about the bounty. And then you had this guy, not a big star by any stretch of the imagination, but you had Goulet come out and try to cash in on Flair at his weakest point here outside the ring at the end of a long match. But Flair fights him off. So we see that A, this can happen at any time. B, Flair is in danger. But C, Flair is Ric Flair. He can stop this, hopefully, and he has friends to help him.
We get a rundown of the loop coming around the Mid-Atlantic territory. They're coming to Parkview High School in South Hill, Virginia. They're coming to Scott Stadium in Charlottesville, Virginia. And you can get your tickets at Mincer's Pipe Shop.
The best thing about these localized promos and running down loop is when they tell you where you can get it. Mincer's Pipe Shop or Bob's Tackle and Bait Shop, like the places that served as what would now be Ticketmaster outlets. It's hilarious. Some of the matches on these shows, you said Scott Stadium in Charlottesville, the Great Kabuki and Gary Hart against Jimmy Valiant and Rufus R. Jones. A main event anywhere in the world. Wow.
The big show is going to be at the Richmond Coliseum, where Jake the Snake Roberts and number one Paul Jones, a favorite of yours, Adam, comes out to cut a promo. This is 1983 Jake the Snake, so he doesn't get to cut the promo. Paul Jones is going to cut the promo on behalf of Jake the Snake.
I've never been more offended by anything in my life. You have Jake Roberts, you have a microphone, and you make the decision that Paul Jones should speak into the microphone instead of Jake Roberts. Most disgusting promotional tactic of 1983, hands down.
Jake wants the Mid-Atlantic title. The Briscoe brothers come out, Jerry and Jack Briscoe, and they come out and they're showing off their tag team titles. They're going to be in a double Indian strap match against Wahoo McDaniel, Roddy Piper. I'm sorry, they're talking about the tag titles. Then they run down the next match, which is a double Indian strap match between Wahoo McDaniel and Roddy Piper taking on Greg the Hammer Valentine and Dick Slater.
Yeah, that's quite the collection of men. I know you're not a big fan of the Hammer, but I want to see that match. I also really liked the Jack and Jerry Briscoe promo, which was basically Jerry Briscoe talking while Jack Briscoe stood there looking like a world champion. There's something great about Jack and Jerry Briscoe, who are like these, particularly Jack, like these incredible technical wrestlers, amateur background, obviously. They don't need to cheat, but they do just because they enjoy doing that in addition to just being great wrestlers. That was good stuff. I also enjoyed Dick Slater talking about the upcoming double strap match, saying, "You think I want belts on this body? Look how clean I am."
After commercial, Jimmy Valiant, the Boogie Woogie Man, comes out. We've already mentioned him once on this show. He comes out and we see clips of a previous show where Gary Hart, manager, favorite of this show, this podcast, Gary Hart comes out to confront Jimmy Valiant. Valiant punches Gary Hart, and this is where he gets jumped by Hart's man, the Great Kabuki,
who is like covered in spider webs. You also didn't mention the most disturbing thing about this whole segment. So Boogie Woogie Man, Jimmy Valiant comes out. He's yelling, he's screaming, he's bopping into his own music. And then we have my own worst nightmare. It's Boogie Inception. We go from Boogie cutting a promo to another segment of Boogie cutting another promo, this time in the Mid-Atlantic set with Bob Caudle interview. This confused me. It terrified me. This was too much Jimmy Valiant for one man to take.
So the gist of this is that when we go back to the original Jimmy Valiant, as we get out of our Inception, Jimmy Valiant says if he can't beat the Great Kabuki, he's going to leave. But if he does beat Kabuki, then Gary Hart is gone. This is a loser leave town match.
Could you imagine being, because I would have been that person, the one person here in the Carolinas in that arena, loudly, vociferously cheering for Great Kabuki to defeat Jimmy Valiant to save Gary Hart's job, I would have been that kid.
No, whoever you were with as a kid would have been like, knock it off.
Yes.
We're going to get killed.
Yes.
Please knock it off.
Exactly. As like people's pocket knives were clicking back and forth next to you.
The World Tag Team Champions, the Briscoe brothers, are joining David Crockett. They are threatening Jay Youngblood and Ricky Steamboat. Again, Jack does not speak, only Jerry. We go to the ring, where it's Mike Davis and Ricky McCord. Two geeks taking on the team of the Assassins.
And the Assassins, it's not A or B, it is one or two, but all you need to know is the rotund assassin, who is the assassin. The Flame, if you remember from that one TV show that we watched. He's awesome. He is so great, just being the assassin. The other assassin just largely exists. He's tall. He's skinny.
Yeah, the rotund, the assassin is also father of referee Nick Patrick from WCW.
Yes, which we had not put that together. One of our listeners, recall on a previous episode, pointed that out to us, and our minds were blown. But yes, Jody Hamilton, the assassin, the star of this tag team.
By far the star of this match. Although, here in the Mid-Atlantic territory, a shocking amount of offense by Davis and McCord on these Assassins.
Yes, we've talked about it with other adjacent territories to this, other NWA affiliated territories, that the difference between the offense and the level of offense that jobbers got, as opposed to what you'd see in the WWF, was striking, to the point to where it almost isn't fair to categorize the guys that were losing TV matches in a territory like Mid-Atlantic in the same category as guys that were losing on WWF television at the same time.
The Assassins finally cut off McCord, but McCord goes through the legs to make a hot tag to Davis, but then he gets cut off as well. This is a very basic match, not a ton happening. Davis and McCord get the advantage on the skinny assassin, and they get in some more offense. McCord hits a flying head scissors. He tries it again, but gets dropped throat first across the top rope.
Oh my God, I'm sorry. I have to jump in. I just discovered who this assassin was with Jody Hamilton. Hercules.
Stop it.
Hercules Hernandez. The Assassins were many. I mean, the Assassins team, which included obviously Jody Hamilton for all the variations. Tom Renesto was the first partner. Randy Colley, who we've seen on several of these territory TV shows, was another. Kurt Von Hess, Ray Farnborough. But here it was Hercules Hernandez.
Wow. And
do you want to know how? Do you want to know how this version of the team ended? It ended when Hercules was unmasked after losing to Jimmy Valiant in a mask versus hair match at a joint Jim Crockett Promotions Maple Leaf Wrestling show in Toronto, Ontario, Canada in April of 1984.
Wow. And who'd have thought that this same Hercules would don a mask later in his career as Super Invader?
There you go. You thought after it didn't work out too well that time that 10 years later he would not have gone down that same road.
So McCord got clothesline, throat first over the top rope. The Assassins start quickly working over the arm of McCord, and he ends up submitting to a chicken wing, and the Assassins are your winners.
I love that the Assassins here, it was the rare thing where the heel team is doing the quick tags in the corner, working over the arm, and that immediately led to the finish. Some cool different things on this show that played into the conventions of tag team wrestling, but also did them in a different way.
Here's an unconventional team when it comes to tag team wrestling, a team of Dory Funk Jr., teaming with Jake the Snake Roberts, managed by number one Paul Jones.
Can you imagine looking at Dory Funk Jr. and Jake the Snake in 1983 and thinking, man, you know what? This act needs some number one Paul Jones.
Their opponents, Glenn Lane and something Larson.
It's Keith Larson, one of the worst.
Is it Keith Larson?
It's Keith Larson, one of the worst promos in professional wrestling history. He looks good in this match. He looks like a bootleg Tommy Rich. But yes, it's Keith Larson.
This was the most dominating casual performance you've ever seen from Jake and Dory. These guys are moving at half speed, doing a whole lot of nothing, but in dominating fashion.
It's like that dominant NHL team. Like I think of the 2010 Blackhawks or the 2013 Blackhawks were like, they could just throw their six on the ice and win. And so they'd every once in a while, it'd be like a Tuesday night, they'd be playing against the Columbus Blue Jackets, and they would not care for the first 55 minutes. The game would be tied. Maybe they'd be down one. And then like the last 5 minutes, they just decide to play and end the game and end up winning by 5 goals. That's Dory and Jake Roberts here.
Yeah, this was great. Jake just casually had the guy in a knee bar, but was like digging his fingers into the knee, just like twisting, trying to pull the kneecap and the joint. It was that was a cool visual, something you don't see very much.
It was like a nasty digging patella claw that was meant to separate the kneecap from the ACL and MCL. This was it was icky to say the least.
At one point, Dory puts on a half crab, again, casually, nonchalant, but then decides to use the bottom rope for more leverage just to cheat for cheating's sake.
Yes, exactly. Much like Jack and Jerry Briscoe that we mentioned earlier, that same vibe where he's great, he doesn't have to, but he just feels like cheating, so he stands on the bottom rope. It's also crazy to think of, we're seeing him here in 83 at Mid-Atlantic, but at the same time, which we've seen on this podcast, both here and even more so in the bonus feed, we've seen Dory Funk Jr. teaming with Terry Funk or making the save for Terry Funk in a singles match in 1983 in All Japan. Like, you had that deal where guys were wrestling in the U.S., but then they were going to Japan a lot and they were making their money there.
And you would see this man again 15 years later in ECW of all places.
Yes. Well, exactly. And then, and Dory would always look the same. Dory looks, I mean, yes, now he looks older, but Dory from about like 1978 to 2002 looked exactly the same.
Yeah, if you saw him in Japan, you saw him as the NWA World Champion. You saw him here in 1983. You saw him in the WWF as Hoss Funk even.
You saw him in Slamboree in 1993.
Looks exactly the same. He had old man syndrome his entire life. Just looked like an old man, and so just always looked the same.
I feel like he and J.J. Dillon must have hung out at like the same weird polluted lake as children, and then this just aged this way.
So finally, they're done messing around, and Dory flips the switch. He flips the Blackhawks' final 2-minute switch like you just described. He turns up the intensity. It's crazy. And then Roberts gets in, kills the guy with a knee lift, plants him with a DDT for the win.
Yeah. Jake, when he decided to, it's interesting because we're so used to Jake, the character, Jake, the promo, the snake that he would bring with him. But seeing Jake here as just an in-ring wrestler, so many cool little things and movements. And when he decides to turn on, that knee lift was it put Mr. Wrestling 2's knee lift in its place. And then the DDT, it's just the perfect execution of the move. No one's ever done it better than he did it here. No one will ever do it better than Jake did it.
We go to the back where we hear from the Mid-Atlantic champion. Now, we've had a long list of Mid-Atlantic champions throughout our doing this podcast and watching episodes of Mid-Atlantic. We've seen, of course, Ron Bass. We've seen Black Bart. We've seen a lot of
such luminaries as.
There's also been some good guys in there, of course. We saw Jack Briscoe as the Mid-Atlantic champion, but the champion here is Rufus R. Jones.
Yes, he's here. He says that he's here to take out Jake the Snake Roberts and Paul Jones. Their long-running feud is going to come to a head. We then have, stepping into the interview studio, Jay Youngblood and Ricky Steamboat. Now, you always hear about them being one of the best babyface tag teams of all time. We've only seen them as a tag team once or twice on this podcast. Here we get a great, serious babyface promo as Jay Youngblood has just recently returned from being put on the shelf by the Briscoes.
Serious is exactly the term. They were dead serious. Steamboat just stands there looking menacing.
Yes.
He doesn't even say anything. And you're used to like soft-spoken babyface fire if need be Ricky Steamboat, but here he's all business. He's serious and menacing. I love
this. Is two shows in this season of Wrestling at Random where we have had serious, intimidating Ricky Steamboat in promos. Think back to that Wrestling Challenge where he was still recovering from the throat shot from Randy Savage with the belt, and he had to speak in a lower tone, and we talked about how well it worked, and maybe you should have cut promos that way all the time. Kind of the same vibe here from Ricky Steamboat. Then
switching gears in the same, like there's no cut, like guys move off, guys move in, and here comes a tornado.
You're not switching
Roddy Piper.
You're not switching gears. You're flipping all the circuit breakers. Here comes Roddy Piper. If you follow the show on Twitter, on Instagram, on any of our social media, you will have seen the GIF of Roddy Piper losing his ever-loving mind here in this promo, talking about this double strap match. That's what this is. Piper is even more insane than you remember.
Insane.
If you've seen him in the WWF in the mid-'80s, he's completely out of his gourd. The only thing I don't like about this is it cuts off mid-promo. We go to commercial.
Yeah, it would have been, I would have thrown right to you hearing this promo because it was so insane and so great. But the video that we had cut out here as we went to commercial. But man, this is by Roddy Piper standards, insane.
Yeah.
And by 1983 standards, nobody's cutting a promo like this.
No, and it stands out on the show. Like, this is a really fun show, but like there is nobody even in the stratosphere up to this point in the show from a promo standpoint of Roddy Piper. As you said, we go to commercial prematurely. We come back and we have another tag team battle as it's the team of Mike Rotunda and the Mid-Atlantic champion Rufus R. Jones taking on Joel Deaton, who I remember both in Global teaming with Billy Black and also as the guy that would drop falls on Stan Hansen's random cowboy six-man tag teams in All Japan. Here, he's teaming with Kelly Kiniski, who we have seen a shockingly high amount of times here on this podcast for a guy that's kind of a bit player as the son of Gene Kiniski.
Yeah, Kelly Kiniski. I think my favorite time we've seen Kelly Kiniski was over in the bonus feed. We reviewed an episode of Mid-Atlantic, and we brought on Mike Sempervive, who hosts the Mid-Atlantic podcast as well as co-host of the Big Audio Nightmare with you. And he came on to talk about this and was explaining that, you know, we're seeing the episode without the localized promos, and they were giving guys the opportunity to do promos in that spot, and Kelly Kiniski getting the opportunity there was horrible. One of the worst promos I've ever heard. Just absolutely shockingly bad on that episode.
Yeah, I would say it's maybe second only to a Keith Larson promo or the one Jesse Barr promo standing next to Ric Flair in Florida. It was on that tier, which is not a tier you ever want to be on. The visual standpoint of this match, and one of the things on the show, like we should mention, it's not a tiny studio. It's like a studio type wrestling show, but it's in a large gym, like a larger high school gym. So it feels like an actual arena. However, like the hard cam's what you would expect. They have this diagonal, like isometric camera shot, which if you listen to this podcast, you know I love that shot. You think of like All Japan shows at Korakuen Hall. It's a cool camera angle. In theory, here, they did not invest in a tripod, and this camera is just wildly shaking all over the place. I feel like I'm trying to watch a Pittsburgh Penguins home game where their cameraman is always zooming in and zooming out. This was it was unwatchable when they went to that shot.
They let Kelly Kiniski get some offense. But again, thank God they didn't let him promo.
No.
Rufus is very popular. Shockingly popular. I had no idea.
Very popular. Rufus also has almost the exact same body type as really, really heavy Adrian Adonis. Like that kind of barrel-chested, big but not like obese upper body, really small legs. The story of the early part of this match is Mike Rotunda is in. He's doing amateur wrestling stuff at a really fast pace, clowning Joel Deaton. And then as Rufus gets tagged in, David Crockett's going on and on about how, well, this is very different now bringing Rufus in because he's really basically not much of a wrestler. And then like the next 3 minutes are Rufus amateur wrestling Joel Deaton here.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was just lots of grappling, amateur wrestling style here, which, it's like one of these, I'm watching Mike Rotunda, and I'm like, man, there's so many times I see Mike Rotunda, and it's like, can this man be any more boring? Horrible. Like, I can't watch him. And then there's other times, there's flashes of like, you're like, oh, this guy's so close to putting it together. He could be like something huge.
He's such a vexing wrestler because, again, like you think of, like you mentioned, the times, even it's like Captain Mike Rotunda where he was boring, or obviously Erwin R. Scheister or Michael Wall Street or VK Wall Street. But then you'll see these other times where you think, well, like, why didn't this guy end up like a Dean Malenko or a Chris Benoit type, or, some of the really good technical guys that came through and made a living in All Japan. Like, he always seemed to me like a guy at his best that should have been a really successful American guy in a Japanese company, but it was too few and far between. And as we've seen before on the podcast, he had no charisma. I remember one backstage promo in particular on one of these territory shows where it was painful. It felt like a hostage video.
Yeah, and like the fast forward to 87 even, and he's in the varsity club and still terrible. Like, and still can't promo with these guys, and it's like, what the heck? But there were flashes. If you go back to our coverage, we reviewed in an earlier season the AWA Wrestle Rock show. And Wyndham and Rotunda were tagging on that AWA Wrestle Rock show. And we're like, man, if I saw this Mike Rotunda, I'd build my territory around this guy.
Even that Saturday night's main event, the first Saturday night's main event, that's where right. they were in a 6-man tag. I can't recall who the third guy was, but yeah, like he either comes across like the biggest zero or a guy that you could potentially build a territory around. There's no middle ground.
There's no middle ground. It's so weird when you see these flashes.
Yeah, I can't think of too many other guys that would be a comp like that, by the way, that they either just seem like they just like get them off my TV, or this guy could be their top guy.
I think early Lex Luger had a lot of that.
Yeah.
But then he figured it out.
Yeah.
To where like, this is how I can be a top guy.
And then he was Lex Luger for the rest of his career. Like Lex Luger or not, like he was Lex Luger from that point forward. And you could see why promotions invested him as a top guy.
Back to this match, Kelly gets the heat on Rufus for way longer than you think he would, being the Mid-Atlantic champion. Includes
the most hilarious bump off a back elbow you have ever seen in your life. Rufus hits this, and it's the best way I can describe it is like if a logger was in the forest and he had started to cut down a tree at like a really weird angle, and then Kelly Kiniski hit that tree with a back elbow. The way Rufus R. Jones spiraled and slowly fell to the mat, it's like that tree.
Deaton is in. Rufus headbutts his way free and tags in Mike Rotunda. Rotunda runs wild. He tags Rufus back in. And Rufus does the big freight train. We were hearing about the freight train the whole match, and we finally got to see it. I was dying to see the freight train from Rufus R. Jones. It's a running shoulder block and dancing.
It's a running body block. He just runs into him with his oddly shaped body, dances really cool, and that's the freight train. it was so great that we had David Crockett just going nuts out the freight train up until this point, and then this is what it was.
That was it.
I will say, like Rufus Jones is in that same pantheon of a Jimmy Valiant, of a Bugsy McGraw, but seeing Rufus Jones here, like, he's not good, but like, I get it. The weird, wacky charisma of Rufus Jones, it works for me. I'm buying into it. I understand why these people are cheering. Like, I can't tell you why, but I feel it in a way that I did not feel Bugsy McGraw or Jimmy Valiant.
100% with you on that. I totally get Rufus R. Jones. Totally get it. And here he hits the big freight train. He's dancing, and then he hits a headbutt, and Rufus gets the pin. We close the show with David Crockett interviewing Bob Orton Jr. and Ric Flair. Your babyface heroes are back to cut a promo.
Yes, they are. Bob Orton says he has confidence in Ric Flair, says Ric Flair has nothing to worry about with the bounty on his head because of friends like him. And immediately I'm like, okay, Bob Orton is turning on Ric Flair. And the PTSD of this turn from Ric Flair is going to be why Ric Flair then turns on Sting 15 times for the remainder of the rest of our lives. But yeah, I immediately thought, okay, Bob is definitely turning on him. Bob is
collecting this bounty 100%. Yes.
Then here comes Roddy Piper shows up. So there's a few things happening here. First, it's Ric Flair, Roddy Piper, and Bob Orton on the screen together as baby faces. I'm wearing my Four Horsemen t-shirt. If you're watching this show on YouTube, this is so far away from the Four Horsemen of just a few years later. These three guys as baby faces. Like, they're all wearing blue shirts. It looks like Ric Flair is wearing a blue shirt that just says Dad on it. I don't understand what this group is going to be. Are they called the Family? They refer to family several times. This I'm sure you'll lay it out. This whole thing is something else.
Now, when Piper came out, now I'm again, my wrestling brain, my modern wrestling brain is just like, oh God, like, I was wrong. Orton's not turning. Piper's gonna come out here and turn and collect this bounty.
Yes.
No, it's just it's guys who I register as bad guys, all just being good guys, and like my brain was just ready for an attack.
It's like when you had the dudes with attitude in early '90s WCW, and it was like Sting and JYD and the Dynamic Dudes, and all these guys, and then Paul Orndorff is a babyface with these guys, and I'm like, what is like the Iron Sheik gonna come out next and be a dude with attitude? I don't quite understand. This promo from Flair before Piper starts going completely insane again. Hearing Ric Flair, who is the dirtiest player in the game, that's been his tagline forever. Hearing Ric Flair say here in this promo, I have friends, I have family, and we live on the right side of the street. What is this? This is making my brain break in two.
If Flair says Goulet had dreams of collecting the bounty, but that's never going to work because he's got friends like Orton. And then Piper comes in. When Piper starts talking, he's talking about being a wanted man. And instead, when you're a wanted man, instead of waiting for them to come to us, we're going to come to you. And they're going to bring the fight as the fighting baby faces they are. And the show goes off the air. This was a weird moment in time.
A very weird moment in time. It's also, to me, noteworthy in that, like, Piper and Orton still come off as, like, heels who are, like, against people who are worse than them. Whereas Ric Flair is just, I'm a babyface. I'm the nicest guy in the world. I live on the right side of the street. I only do good things. It's so weird. It's cool to see. Like, I love seeing this. I've never seen this version of Ric Flair during this time period, but it definitely it messes with your head a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the end of the show. This was the production of this show it's different than the regular Mid-Atlantic television show. It's not a slick studio show. This is where they also like intersplice in big matches from an arena. This was just
Well, and this in and of itself has more of an arena feel, even the non-splice stuff. Like the matches aren't in a tiny studio, which is noteworthy when you think about Worldwide years later when it was just an NWA WCW show. They, up until like the MGM Studios Disney time period, they kept that feel. Like we talked about how one of the first episodes here on the one of the first episodes on the bonus feed was that full episode long Ric Flair Barry Windham match, which was from Worldwide, and it was a loud screaming arena. And we talked about how cool the difference in the vibe of that compared to arena show was. And you have that here in the early days of Worldwide.
So cool that the Mid-Atlantic format for Worldwide just kind of kept on keeping on, like you mentioned, into the Jim Crockett Promotion national days. So definitely,
no need to fix something that isn't broken.
So definitely a unique show. Best thing on the show for you?
I think the thing I'll remember most from the show is Ric Flair and Bob Orton wearing matching tights as a babyface tag team. The best thing on this show is by far that first insane whirling dervish Tasmanian devil of a promo from Roddy Piper. And I'll just say now the worst thing on the show is that promo getting cut short, not getting to see where and how Roddy Piper was going to land that plane.
Yeah, honorable mention to the double atomic drop spot.
Yes!
Also in the opening. Worst thing on this show, I'll throw the Jimmy Valiant Inception promo.
Yes, Boogie Inception.
Bad editing really tripped us all up. But we got there, and we did get to see Gary Hart. That's the only thing that was redeeming of that whole Jimmy Valiant segment.
Way too little Gary Hart, but yes, a little bit of Gary Hart is definitely better than no Gary Hart.
Yeah, otherwise, good show, fun show. If this was on, this would make me tune in to the next episode of Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling. This would make me go down to Mincer's Pipe Shop and pick myself up a ticket to Scott Stadium to go see a show in Charlottesville, Virginia. So.
Yeah, I feel like any of these early to mid 80s shows, we've talked about it before, that when I watch them, and I think you do as well, I think as a kid who grew up during this general time period, I was really little. I was only like 2 years old, but I started watching wrestling just a year later. Like as a kid, knowing what I liked about wrestling, what hooked me as a kid, would this show have hooked me if it was the first time I saw wrestling? And I think so, just based off of that Piper promo and then the stuff towards the end. I think the Piper promo aired before Boogie Inception, correct? In the order of this show, because
it did not. No,
then maybe I would have seen Boogie Inception. I never would have watched another wrestling show in my life. Touch and go.
Well, with that, we're going to call it a podcast. If you want to continue to support the podcast, don't forget that the entire back catalog of this free feed is available to you. If you haven't listened to the episodes, don't worry. It's all evergreen content. It's brand new episodes for you. Like you can just listen to it right now, all the way back to episode 1 of season 1 if you like. We've covered many different territories and time periods. So take a look at the entire back catalog of the free feed. It's right there. No extra cost to you. You can support the show for free also by telling your wrestling fan friends about the show. Wrestling fans know other wrestling fans, so please tell them about the show. Show them how to subscribe to the podcast. And throw us a subscription over on YouTube. Adam mentioned it earlier. We have the video version of this podcast up on our YouTube channel. Search for Wrestling at Random Podcast over at YouTube. And just subscribe to it there, even if you don't want to consume your podcast that way. Those subscriptions help us work the algorithm so other wrestling fans can find the show. So please continue to support us that way. If you want all those additional bonus episodes that we were talking about throughout the show, that's available at our Patreon, patreon.com/wrestlingatrandom. Or if you're an Apple Podcast subscriber, you can just hit subscribe right there. It'll unlock all of those bonus episodes right there in your podcatcher of choice. And with that, make sure you interact with the show via YouTube is the best way to interact with the show, but also via social media. We're on every social platform, from Threads to X to Facebooks to everything. We're everywhere. You can find us at Wrestle at Random. So make sure you're following there, where Adam will put up the GIFs for what shows we're going to be reviewing every single Sunday. And that is it. That's it, I think. I think that's everything. I'm going to wrap it up and call it a podcast. Adam, thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you, Jeremy. This was a fun show. And yeah, make sure, like you said, follow us on social media. On Thursdays, we put up the GIF and the description of the show that will then go up on that Sunday, just 3 days later. So yes, check us out. And yeah, good times. Mid-Atlantic is good. I can feel Mike Sempervive enjoying us recording this show, and I'm sure the next time Mid-Atlantic comes around, we'll get him on.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening. We'll talk to you again next time.